Okay, welcome everybody. Hope you can hear me okay. I'd like to say a big welcome to all of our student members and our IC international student chapters. So welcome to everyone in whatever part of the world that you're dialing in from. Thanks very much for joining us today. I think we have even more student chapters represented here today than we did last week, so that's really great to see. My name is Paul Gordon. I'm the IC's Regional Director for International Operations. I'm based here in the UK. I would like, just to begin with, to introduce two of my IC staff colleagues. So we're joined on the line by Catherine Cole. Catherine, could you just quickly introduce yourself, please? Catherine, you're muted. There we are.
Sorry. Yeah, my name's Catherine Cole and I'm the International Director at ICE and I'm based in the UK.
Thank you. And also Patrick Courtney, if you can hear us, Patrick.
Thanks, Paul. Yes, my name is Patrick Courtney. I'm the International Membership Recruitment Manager, also based in the UK.
Wonderful. I will very shortly be introducing, of course, Paul Sheffield, the IC President. I'm also pleased to say that we're joined today by two of the IC's President's future leaders, Tim Howe and Chris Lansborough. Welcome, guys. Thanks for joining us. To all of our student members, we want to ensure that you get as much as possible out of your IC student membership. As we all know, face-to-face contact and events have become much more difficult at this moment in time, with different parts of the world being in various stages of lockdown. So we've developed this series of webinars around the theme of career development to really help you guys to make some good decisions and understand how ICE can support you on this journey. So this is the second in a series of 3 webinars for international student members. Last week we had a really successful session talking about the IC Learning Hub, which is a fantastic resource that's freely available to all student members and can really give you a head start in terms of your professional development. The third session will be on the 7th of July and is going to be on practical tips and advice for career development and that'll be led by a leading employer, and we'll give you some more detail about the session at the end of this webinar. Can I just ask everyone to mute their microphones if they're able to? But today, obviously, we're delighted to be joined by Paul Sheffield, who's president of the Institution of Civil Engineers, as well as the former CEO of Kia Group. I'd like to just quickly run through the format of today's session. So we've had a lot of questions submitted in advance by student chapters. So many thanks indeed for those. We've had a mixture of technical and non-technical questions. So because this is a webinar about career development, we're going to prioritize the non-technical. We're going to try and focus on those non-technical questions. In the time that we have available, we're unlikely to be able to get through all of your questions, but we will try to get through as many as we can. Please do use the chat function during this webinar to post any additional questions or comments that you may have. So that's the little dialog box that you'll see in the middle of your screen. And once again, as per last week, we'd like to spend 5 minutes just at the end of this session to talk to you about IC graduate membership as well. So as I said, please ensure that you stay muted throughout, that you turn your camera off unless you're presenting. And if you want to raise a comment or a question at any point, please, as I said, do so using the chat facility. So let's kick things off. Paul, can you hear me?
I can indeed. Thank you. Yes.
Excellent. Thanks very much for joining us today. Just before we begin with the questions, let me start by telling you a little bit about Paul's background. So Paul studied civil engineering at the University of Surrey, graduating in 1983. Becoming chartered in 1987. Following graduation, he spent 31 years with the Kia Group, so initially working on a wide range of civil engineering and construction projects in various parts of the world. So these included a gold mine in Papua New Guinea, a desalination plant in Saudi Arabia, and underground railways in Hong Kong. Between 2005 and 2010, he was on the board of Kia, with responsibility for global civil engineering and construction activities. And from 2010 to 2014, he was CEO of the Kier Group with overall revenues of £3 billion and activities spanning across construction, support services, property development and high-rise residential. In 2014, he joined Lang O'Rourke to head their UK and Middle East construction business. Paul's also on the supervisory board of the Dutch construction group BAM. He's a chartered engineer, an IC fellow, president of the Institution of Civil Engineers. He was awarded a CBE in 2014 for services to construction and charitable fundraising. So Paul, a big welcome to today's webinar. Could we start off by asking you what it was that inspired you to become a civil engineer in the first place?
Of course you can, and thank you very much for that introduction. And I'd love to say hello to everybody who's online, wherever you are in the world. And actually, this is a fantastic forum to be able to spread the the reach of the institution around the world. So it's a really useful opportunity. Just coming back to your question, what inspired me to become a civil engineer? I think a couple of things. I was always quite a restless sort of teenager, if you like, and I never wanted to be in a job where I would sit at a desk all day long, or be stuck to an office or a familiar routine. I always wanted to be out and about and achieving something practical. Having said that, I had never heard of civil engineering before I sort of got to the last year of my school life. And at that point, a friend of mine was doing civil engineering, so I started looking into it and thought that it looked absolutely fascinating as a career. So I at a very late stage, changed all of my university applications to go and study civil engineering. And to be quite frank, I have loved every single minute of it. That was 41 years ago. And so to a lot of you, I'm sure I look a very old chap, but I did start university 41 years ago. But I can remember vividly the first day that I went to university. I can remember vividly the first day I set foot on a construction project. And so there's if you are not careful, the next 40 years will go past so quickly that you won't be able to enjoy it. For me, it was civil engineering is so practical and so tangible. You have an impact on everybody's life. From the minute you wake up in the morning and you get your breakfast or make a cup of tea, or you climb in the car and drive to an office, civil engineers have provided the water, they provided the electricity, they provided the roads and the office buildings that we go to, and it's an industry that you can be so proud of. And I think today it probably has an even bigger footprint in some respects, because the impact that we can have on sustainability and ensuring that we can improve people's lives around the world, I think is second to none. So I think it's a fantastic industry to go into. Paul, as I said a few moments ago, I've enjoyed every single minute of the last 41 years, and I don't think I have ever had 2 days that have been the same. And I don't think many people could say that walking into a job. So it really has been fascinating.
That's great. So after that accidental start, I mean, you clearly made a pretty good decision. Could you share with us, some of your sort of your main career highlights?
Yeah, I mean, perhaps I'll just outline a little bit of my career for you, if you like. That might just sort of help. As Paul mentioned, I went to a university in the south of England and graduated in 1983. But as part of my undergraduate training, I did a year working out in industry. So I did 2 years at university, 1 year's working in industry, and then a final year back at uni. And that year working in industry, I actually chose to work in Africa. So went out for my first overseas job, if you like, as a young undergraduate. So when I finally came back to university and graduated, I really wanted to work for somebody who would be prepared to send me outside the UK for experience and learning. And I then spent, as Paul said, the next 31 years with a UK company called Kier.
Is now joining.
And the first 17 years of that period, I spent working on projects, and about half of that was outside the UK, half of it was inside. So I started off as a young green engineer, doing everything from making the tea to setting out and managing the construction operations, and I progressed over a sort of 10-year period through to project manager. And the last 7 years I spent as a project manager on some pretty big projects. I think one of the real highlights that I had through that period was working as a chief engineer on a big concrete gravity dam in the mountains of the UK. And I had just become chartered. I was 27 years old, I think. I'd just become chartered, and was able to take up a role as chief engineer on a big dam. And as chief engineer, I was in charge of all of the technical aspects of constructing this dam, and it was in a very environmentally sensitive area, so we had to be really careful about the work that we did and any damage to the landscape. But it really was a fascinating opportunity. If I had not been a chartered engineer, I would not have been able to fulfill that role, because it was a very strict demand from the client that it was a professionally qualified engineer who would lead that operation. I was on that project for nearly 3 years actually, and then moved on to a big power station, big gas-fired power station, where I was project manager for a couple of years, and then I moved out to Saudi Arabia and built a desalination plant as a project manager, and then from Saudi Arabia to Hong Kong, and worked on the underground railway system in Hong Kong. So all of those were really fascinating opportunities for me to grow and to explore other cultures and people and skills. But after that period, I then came back to the UK, and I spent another 13 years with Kier, either running their infrastructure business or running the entire construction operations for the company or the group. So eventually became chief executive of the company. And I suppose in terms of career highlights, that has to be one of the most or the highest achievements. But it's not necessarily the one that gives you the most fun. It can be a very challenging and lonely job being a chief exec, but I think the projects that I've had most fun out of have been the really technically challenging construction projects where I've been a project manager. So those have been really the sort of career highlights, I guess, Paul.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. That leads quite well actually into my next question. So I mean, clearly you've travelled widely, you've worked in many parts of the world, which obviously is an attraction and a benefit for people wanting to work in this industry. If you want the opportunity to see the world, then being a civil engineer can allow you to do that. If I was to ask you to pick one international project that you've worked on that was the most exciting, the most interesting project you worked on in your career, what would that be?
I think it would have to be Hong Kong, and it was just over 20 years ago now. I was project director on a big underground railway station in Hong Kong. And for anybody who's had the fortune to travel there or even to see it on films and TV, Hong Kong is a very, very congested, densely populated, high-rise, busy city, and to be able to build deep underground structures underneath such an urban environment is a huge technical engineering challenge, but hugely satisfying at the same time. So we were the station that we were building was in what they call cut and cover. So it wasn't actually tunneled, but we had to form a big excavation 35 meters deep right in the middle of some city streets. And we actually had to keep the traffic flowing over our heads the entire time that we were working. And we had to drive some tunnels underneath the Hong Kong Stock Exchange and connect in with a 30-year-old underground railway system. So it was a hugely challenging project from a technical point of view, but very, very rewarding to be able to contribute to the huge growth and prosperity of Hong Kong itself. And I think something that really really sticks out in my mind is the people of Hong Kong and the commitment that they've got to getting things done. And it really taught me a lot about other cultures and other people who live in other parts of the world. It doesn't matter where you come from. We will all approach a problem in a slightly different way. And there isn't a right way or a wrong way. There's just there are many, many ways of achieving the same thing. And I think when you do get the opportunity to meet people from different cultures, it really makes you appreciate the skills that they can bring just by looking at a problem in a different way. That's something that you can probably all benefit from through your working lives. Always be receptive and open to other people's ideas and ways of doing things, because you don't always have the answers and the solutions yourself, but becoming a good manager, which we all need to do at some point in our lives, really means that you need to somehow harness the skills of all the people in your team to create something that is going to make everybody proud and is going to enhance people's lives.
Amazing. And have you, Paul? Well, I presume you've been an ICE member throughout your career.
Yeah.
Throughout that time. So interested to hear from you about how ICE has sort of supported you throughout this journey. Along those different touch points. I mean, obviously you've reached the top within the Institution of Civil Engineers now as our president. Could you talk to us about how ICE supported that journey?
Yeah, certainly. I think I became a graduate member of the ICE as soon as I graduated, and I've been a member ever since. And I know that it was very, if you wanted to progress in technical roles, it was imperative that you became a chartered engineer as soon as you could. And so it was very much an ambition of mine to take my chartership within 3 or 4 years of graduating. And it's really important that you get a wide range of experience to be able to demonstrate your capability and your knowledge of the industry. And so I think that first 4 years, I worked on, as you mentioned before, a gold mine in Papua New Guinea, a big office building in London. And I did a year in design work where I was designing underground structures and rock anchored foundations. And then I moved up I did actually do 6 months in Turkey working on a hotel, and then I started working on the dam project in the UK. And so the breadth of experience that I got in that period of time was huge. And I probably wouldn't have been encouraged to volunteer for some of those positions if I hadn't been trying to diversify and broaden my own experiences. And I certainly think that helped me to get chartership quite quickly. I think you have to just remember that 35 years ago, which is when I did my chartership, there wasn't the opportunity to communicate with people around the world all that easily. Some of the first projects I worked on, we didn't even have a telephone. You might all be laughing in the background there, but 35 years ago in some parts of the world, there was no opportunity to have a telephone, let alone Facebook or email or social media contact. And so actually keeping in touch with the activities of the ICE was much more challenging than it is today. But I, having become chartered at quite an early age, I did make sure that wherever I was in the world, I tried to link in with the local institution. It was particularly easy in Hong Kong, actually, because the Hong Kong institution is really strong, and they carried out a lot of extracurricular training activities and CPD, which was really useful for me at the time. And then when I came back to the UK, which was 22 years ago, I chose to become, or to sit on, or to apply to sit on council, which is the governing body of the institution. And I sat on council back in 2000 through to 2003. And actually, it was really interesting to understand how the IC operates, but the network of friends and contacts that you get through that opportunity will be a network that will stay with you for life, not just for the 2 or 3 years that you work with them. And so it's quite incredible, actually, over the subsequent 15 years, how many of those people I met in that period I've come across time and time again in really important business activities. So I think really interested. It's really great to support you in getting the technical training and the CPD that will support you right the way through your career, but never underestimate the quality of the network of people that you will meet, and the doors that they might be able to open for you, and the problems that they might be able to help you to solve as you go through your career. So, at different parts of my career, it's been invaluable. And the additional thing, sorry, just one more point there, is that the IC actually is a very well-respected, independent voice that governments, very strongly in the UK, but in other parts of the world as well, that governments do listen to when looking at infrastructure projects. And so, the IC has a role to play at many different levels. Government level right at the top in terms of influencing policy, and networks of friends and business contacts right the way through, and of course your own personal CPD and development. So it can be really useful.
Yeah, fantastic. And I like what you said there, Paul, about the networking benefit of being within that ICE community. And just a reminder, really, to all the students on the line that no matter where in the world you are based, we chances are we have a network of local ICE members, and we run events and activities in many parts of the world. So do investigate that, and don't forget the importance of networking would be the message. But Paul, we have student representatives from all over the world on this call, from I think 12 different student chapters. What advice would you give to today's students and graduates who are looking to embark on their own careers?
Well, look, I think a couple of I think the first one might surprise you a little bit, because I know when I left university, I sort of came out thinking that I was this fresh young graduate. I knew everything there was to know about civil engineering, and I'm going to sort of change the world, if you like. But I think you very soon realize that the knowledge you've gained at university is a springboard to the future, and it's just a tiny part of a really broad and complex industry. And so I think a big piece of advice is to just think of yourself as a sponge for information for the first couple of years, and just carry on learning everything that you possibly can about the project that you're involved in, whether you're designing a part of a major project, or whether you're designing some temporary works, or whether you're actually going out to work on a live construction project. And you will learn so much from the people that you work with, and use them as a teacher, use them as a mentor, use them as a guide through the industry, and never be shy or afraid of asking what might appear to be a silly question. Because my experience of people in working life is that they actually like being asked. They actually like and enjoy being acting as a bit of a mentor for you, and you will learn a huge amount. And that doesn't have to be your manager. It doesn't have to be somebody at the same level as you. It can actually be a steel fixer or a CAD operator or a carpenter on a project. You know, they have been. I often say to young engineers in our industry now, don't think that you can write a method statement or a risk assessment without actually talking to the people who will do the job, because they have probably done it before. And if you write a risk assessment or a method statement in a way that is that doesn't work, then you're only going to make a problem for yourself later on. So the first thing, I think, always talk to the people around you on the project and learn from them, and keep that with you right the way through. I still do that today. I learn so much from young people and men and women on the tools in our industry. And I think the second point would probably be around options that you might consider. You know, many of you perhaps are going to be coming towards the end of university careers, and at the end of this, you'll have choices. What type of engineering, civil engineering, do I want to go into, or do I want to go into banking? You know what, we do need bankers, because bankers ultimately provide finance for infrastructure projects. So if you ever did go into banking, just make sure you never forget civil engineers, because you can funnel some money towards infrastructure projects and we'll all be happy. But on the basis that you stay in civil engineering, there are so many options ahead of you about consulting, contracting, environmental engineering, acoustic engineering, ground investigations. There are so many options ahead of you that you'll probably be quite confused perhaps by some of the choices. One thing your university education teaches you is how to think logically, and I think providing you assess the options that you have ahead of you with a cold engineering mind, and you sort of categorize the opportunities or the strong points and the weak points of each of the options, and then make a balanced decision and judgment, then trust your own skill and your own judgment and pursue that action. And I think having made that choice, I would probably recommend very strongly that you don't look back and regret it, because the choice you make might lead you to a bumpy road. It might not quite go the way that you planned, but there's no certainty that any of the alternatives that you declined would have been a smooth, easy road either. And so you can't rewrite history. You can't unmake a decision. So whatever decision you make, stick with it and make the best out of it. So I think those are probably two really useful learning points, or that you can think of as you embark on your careers.
Yeah. I'm writing down some notes there. Yeah, just to summarize, the key points: always talk to the people around you and ask as many questions as you can, and think logically and assess your options, and make a balanced decision is your advice, and have convictions in that decision as well.
And have conviction with it, and you know, trust your own judgment, and then don't regret it later.
Yeah, whether that's civil engineering or a different career choice, have conviction in that decision. Okay, I'm going to move on now to a question from Powell University, a very relevant question in the current climate that's come in, which is around what do you think the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic will have upon future job prospects in industry? Could you maybe give us your view on that, perhaps in what the short-term impact might be and the longer-term picture?
Indeed, yeah. I mean, look, I think the short-term impact is difficult to completely assess, but so many industries around the world are very, very badly affected by COVID. And I think civil engineering infrastructure is not as badly affected as many others, but clearly it's undergoing a bit of a pause right now. But what I am going to do, Paul, is just to look a little bit further ahead, because I'm firmly believe that the infrastructure, the global infrastructure opportunities that we have ahead of us are just enormous. The population is growing significantly. We're anticipating over the next 20 years that the global population will grow from 7 billion to 10 billion. And coupled with that, there is a significant move of people away from rural areas and into towns and cities. So just looking at that one global issue of population growth and movement towards cities, that is inevitably going to demand infrastructure is invested in by governments around the world. Whether that's to create more housing, and if you create more housing, you've got to have more sewerage, you've got to have more fresh water, you've got to have more electricity, you've got to have more transport and transport networks. And so all of these things are designed and built by civil engineers. And so I have absolutely no doubt that globally, the opportunities for civil engineers and civil engineering are going to be really strong over the next 20 or 30 years. Right now, there's a bit of a hiccup while local organizations and governments overcome the sort of social distancing rules and regulations, which have put a bit of a pause in the whole area. But I'm convinced that globally, the demands are going to be exceptionally strong. And if you overlay over the top of that, the United Nations Sustainability Development Goals, which is really aimed at, globally, all 165 nations of the world have signed up to the SDGs back in 2015. And ultimately, it's to enhance the lives of populations everywhere. And that requires easy access to clean drinking water, to sanitation, to transport, good housing, and all of these things. And we are right at the forefront of that. So yet again, I think there's a really, really strong imperative for infrastructure and civil engineers, particularly, to deliver it.
Yeah, and you mentioned, Paul, there the UN Sustainable Development Goals. We have another question. This was also from Powell University, which is, how can ICE help young civil engineers to be global green citizens?
The UN's Sustainable Development Goals are really right at the core of the ICE's strategy over the next 10 to 20 years. And if you have time to have a look at the ICE website, you'll see a huge amount of articles and papers outlining the actions that the ICE are taking and supporting to pursue the SDGs in the wider context. This goes from every aspect. Certainly in December last year, the ICE published a document called Enabling Better Infrastructure, which is a document that's been published around the world now and pushed out to many global governments to help governments to understand how to plan and deliver huge and better infrastructure projects in their towns and cities. So we work at the policy level there, and we also work at an educational level to make sure that people understand the role they can play in actually transforming people's lives, and also in terms of ongoing continuous professional development. There's a lot of learning modules that the ICE has on its learning virtual learning environment to help explain this to people and train them as they go through. So it's a huge focus of us at the ICE to help this aspect, Paul.
Yeah. I think what we can probably do is to signpost some of these resources for those on the call today, so we can circulate some of those links afterwards, so you know where to look. moving on again, you spoke a little bit earlier, Paul, or you started to talk about the kind of the future of civil engineering, and the fact that there's always going to be a demand for civil engineering knowledge and expertise. We received what we thought was a really interesting question, and quite a far-sighted question as well, which came in from KIIT University in India. And this was around the future of humankind. Obviously, is likely to involve in a pretty big way. We think, the colonization of space, and in what ways can civil engineers contribute to that revolution? Not an easy question to answer, I realise, and I think there's probably no right or wrong answers to this, because in many ways we don't know. But do you have any thoughts on that one, Paul?
Wow, what a fascinating question. There's a couple of things that spring to mind. First of all, perhaps one of them on a more theoretical level, I guess. But there was a friend of mine graduated with me from civil engineering 40 years ago, and one of his specialities in civil engineering was hydraulics. And from hydraulics he went into thermodynamics, and from thermodynamics he went into rocket propulsion, and he actually has worked on jet engines and the design of jet engines, and it's only an extrapolation of the design of jet engines that goes into the propulsion systems for space rockets. And so there are many parts of civil engineering that could be applicable to not only the launch platforms that are created for space travel, but also the propulsion systems and aerodynamics of these systems. So inevitably there have been a lot of civil engineers involved in this whole program already. But if you actually look at, I guess the question perhaps is looking at the colonization of planets, let's say Mars. Yeah. So you've got to find a way ultimately of making a concrete equivalent material up on a planet like Mars. How are you going to anchor whatever it is that you build down onto the surface? You've got to understand the geology, you've got to understand the geotechnics, you've got to understand probably the environmental constraints that you're going to be working within. So there's an immediate need for ground investigations and material analysis in some of the early missions to decide whether you need to, or whether you would be able to extract the minerals from the surface that you need to be able to make a concrete, because it would be highly expensive if you ended up transporting every ton of steel that you need to build a space station up on Mars, rather than being able to build something whilst you're up there. So I think there's some really interesting challenges for engineers of all varieties as to how you would actually build a community on a distant planet, because it would probably be completely unconceivable to carry every ton of every product that you need with you. So you would need to innovate and use materials that you can find locally, and ultimately that's what civil engineers have done for probably 2,000 years, in terms of using local materials to build something with. So I think great prospects, but it might be quite a long commute to and from work.
Yes. So I guess you're probably looking at a whole new branch of engineering science here, which would be how do you engineer in that kind of zero gravity environment? Because this is quite an interesting question. I might just give the opportunity to both our future leaders or any of the IC staff on the line, if anyone wants to comment on this question. No pressure, guys, but if you have a view on that, do share.
Well, just while you're on, I was actually going to let either Tim or Chris, who are on the call with us, if you had any observations on the value of the ICE to your development. You're probably 4 or 5 years ahead of a lot of the students on the call, and have sort of embarked on the first stages of your careers. So maybe if you've got some comments on either of those questions, it would be great to hear you.
Yeah, I think to tackle the space question, I think it's very interesting to see the variety of roles that civil engineers, do today. And I think that space will just be another area that we start to be used in. And we're looking at very similar concepts. We still need to look at how loads transfer through structures, and it just is all in a different sort of area. So yeah, it's a really interesting sort of future to see where we will be needed, but it's certainly definite that civil engineers will play a critical role in making sure that we can build that infrastructure and to sustain, effectively colonize, whether it's another planet or a space station or whatever it may be. So certainly there's a lot of interesting future to be had out there. Chris, I don't know if you want to tackle space or.
Yeah, I can add to that as well. I suppose it may sound like a bit of a kind of far-fetched question, but it's definitely something that is being tabled at the minute. One of our other future leaders, Haley, is working on the future of the engineer, and all these kind of mad ideas are all being explored as options and opportunities, and how we can advance as civil engineers to answer the various questions. So it's a good one. It's not that ridiculous.
Yeah, thanks guys. Thanks to Tim and Chris there. I think I'm just going to ask Catherine at this stage whether we've had any further questions via the chat facility.
Yeah, hi, thanks, Paul. I've been scanning the chat function throughout the whole session, and there's been lots of really, really good feedback, which is great. So I think people have found this a really, really useful session with lots of comprehensive answers from Paul. Thank you. One question's been posted, and it's from Jain University in India. And it's a really good question, and it's something that the staff team are looking at the moment, and that is how can we build a program of activity that brings student chapters across the world closer together globally, but also with the UK GNS network in the UK as well. So I think, Paul, you might have some ideas on this, and also the President Future Leaders.
Well, I think one of the big benefits that that COVID-19 has thrown our way is actually that it's forced us to use communication platforms and tools like this one in a way that's never been. I would say never, but I think a lot of industry has been reluctant to use communications platforms like this in the past. But this last 12 weeks has forced many of us to use it, for hours and hours and hours every single day. And I think it just demonstrates to you how easy it is to set up global conferences and global team meetings to actually discuss interesting subjects and opportunities. And so I think there's a great opportunity for chapters from universities around the world to join up with some of the graduates and students teams and functions in the UK. So I think there's the platform is there for us to be able to do it. And I think it's probably, what the IC perhaps needs to do is to join some of the dots together. It would be really interesting, I'm sure, for example, for a London graduates and student chapter in the UK to have an online session with an equivalent chapter in Delhi or in Hong Kong to have a couple of presentations talking about some of their infrastructure issues in their cities, because both parties will learn a lot from each other. So I think there's a great opportunity for that.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, thanks very much, everyone. We are a little bit restricted by time here, so apologies if we haven't managed to get around to every question. I want to thank Paul for his input today and really comprehensive answers. Just before we finish, I'd like to hand over to Patrick Courtney to just spend a couple of minutes telling our student members about the graduate membership route. So Patrick, over to you.
Thank you very much, Paul. I'm just going to spend a few minutes now just talking to you about professional qualification why it's important for your career, how ICE can support you throughout your career, and what to do to progress towards professional qualification. So you've chosen a career in civil engineering. How can ICE support you? We can help you to progress your career with professional qualifications, develop with access to our knowledge resources, connect with over 95,000 members in over 150 countries, and access support to help you throughout your career. One of the key reasons people join ICE is to become professionally qualified, whether as an engineering technician, incorporated or chartered engineer. The letters EngTech, iEng or CEng after your name are a mark of excellence. They increase your status, provide greater prospects, enhance career progression. They're valued by employers around the world. They have the potential to increase your earnings, and also, as Paul, as the president's mentioned, enable and open doors to global opportunities. So the key steps to professional qualifications. Well, the good news is you're already completing this first step, which is academic qualifications. Courses are accredited at different levels, EngTech, iEng or CEng. So use our course search tool to check your eligibility. That's ice.org.uk/course search. You then need to go on and get some experience to develop the skills, knowledge and practical experience required for professional qualification. We call this initial professional development. And the third stage is professional review. Once you've got those skills and knowledge experience, you need to complete an interview. Throughout this, we want you to log and record your continuing professional development, which is all of your learning and development activities. How can we support you? We have structured programs. One is IC Training Scheme, which is run by IC approved employers. Another is mentor supported training for those people who work for organizations that don't have approval for training schemes. You will be allocated a supervising civil engineer, or you can identify a mentor through our online mentor matching platform. You can then go on to use our IPD online system to log all of your learning and all of your experience. So what happens next, as soon as you graduate, enroll as a graduate member of ICE, then enroll on your company's approved IC training scheme or IC mentor supported training, and then register with IPD online. Certainly make the most of your membership. And one of the really important messages that has come through during this lockdown COVID-19 stage is that employers are going to ask you what you did during lockdown. How did you learn? How did you grow? And ICE has a real amazing wealth of materials, recorded webinars, digital journals. There's the IC Learning Hub, which we mentioned earlier, which is the virtual learning environment, as well as other online resources. So certainly make the most of your membership to ensure that when interviewers ask you, what did you do during lockdown, you've got some really good, strong answers. As we've already mentioned, there's support around the world. We have volunteer members working as representatives in many parts of the world. So do reach out and engage with your local community of ICE members. You can find the contacts through the links there, ic.org.uk/near-you. So in summary, as soon as you graduate, enroll as a graduate member, find a training scheme or sign up for mentor supported training, and then register with IPD online. Thank you. Good luck with your journey to professional qualification. Keep the end goal in sight, and don't forget that support is always available. Back to you, Paul.
Thank you, Patrick. Okay, I'm afraid that we have come to the end of our time for this webinar. I would like to thank you all for joining us today, but especially to thank the IC President, Paul Sheffield. So thank you, Paul.
It's my pleasure, and I would like to wish everybody every success in your future careers. But you've got a minor problem of overcoming final examinations first, but I'm sure you'll do very well in those, and good luck in your careers. I'm sure you will enjoy every single minute of it, as I have.
Yeah. Please remember that we're here to support you guys at any point, so you can email us at iceinternational@ice.org.uk. As Paul said, for those of you in your final year of studies, we wish you good luck. Do be sure to become an IC graduate member. It will help you to realise your potential as a civil engineer. Please remember as well that there is a reduced subscription rate for graduate membership available if your earnings are underneath £17,000 per year. So do be sure to investigate that if that's applicable to you, or ask for more information about the reduced rate. I'd like to quickly mention our next webinar, if I can, which is on the 7th of July. We'll be joined by Tom Elam, who's the Director of Talent Acquisition for S&C Lavalin, who's responsible for the Middle East, Africa, and the Asia Pacific, so a major global employer, who'll be giving practical tips and practical advice on career development, things like CV writing and interview skills, the kind of things that engineering employers are really looking for to help you understand that a little bit better. So hopefully that'll be a really useful session. That will take place at 1 p.m. time on the 7th of July, and the invitations will be going out next week for that session, so please make sure that you join us for that. Otherwise, we look forward to seeing you on the 7th. That's all for now. Thanks very much for joining us. Please stay safe, and we'll see you again soon.